Reel 6. The Ground That Was Made Holy. This is the 6th reel. I want to begin by acknowledging two things. The first is that I have been preparing this reel since shortly after I finished the 5th. I do not mean that I have been writing it. Writing is a clean word for what this has been. I mean that the folder has remained on my desk. I have moved it when I needed the desk for other work. I have moved it back. I have made tea beside it. I have put other books on top of it once or twice, as if weight were a form of decision. It is not. The second thing is that this reel contains an account Henrik Lindström herself did not place with the ordinary access material. She did not destroy it. She did not erase the label. She did not file it under a false subject heading. She kept it. But she sealed it with a strip of paper folded twice around the box and fixed under the string. On that strip she wrote 5 words. Decide again before playing. I have decided again. I will tell you why when we come to it. I will not hide the decision from you. If you decide, after hearing the account, that I have decided wrongly, then I would rather you know that the error was mine, not an accident. Not an oversight, not the carelessness of a man who opened a box and let whatever was inside it fall into the room. I have opened it carefully. That does not mean I was right to open it. Hedvig's folder for this reel is thinner than reel 5's. That may surprise you. It surprised me. After Mura, after the trial material, after the careful accounts of trolldom and the refusals around it, I expected reel 6 to continue in the same documentary weight. More notes, more sources, more cross-references in her square hand. There are fewer. The pages are not empty because Hedvig had nothing to say. They are empty in the way a room is empty after someone has decided not to speak there. That is a different kind of emptiness. There are 3 field cards. There are 2 folded sheets from parish notebooks. There is 1 typed extract from a dictionary of dialect terms, with her underlining in blue pencil. There is a loose card on which she has written only, "Do not confuse a guardian with an innocent thing." And there is the sealed reel. It is not the whole of reel 6. It is the 3rd account only. The first 2 accounts are filed normally. One concerns a parish in Hälsingland and a black dog under the south wall of a church. The other concerns a dead man on the Bohuslän coast who did not stay where the living had placed him. The 3rd concerns a pastor, a repair in 1957, and a claim about what had been found in old foundation stone. It is the 3rd account Hedvig sealed. It is the 3rd account I have decided to play. I am telling you this now because the decision belongs at the beginning. If I saved it until the moment before the account, I would be using hesitation as theater. This is not theater. This is a file. A file is a quieter thing. It can still do harm. Hedvig gave this reel a Swedish title, Den vägda jorden, the consecrated ground. Or, more literally for our purposes tonight, the ground that was made holy. The English is less elegant. It is also more exact. That is why I have kept it. Ground is not naturally holy. It may be old, it may be beautiful, it may hold bones older than any living language spoken above it. It may be mapped, inherited, fenced, taxed, bought, sold, stolen, defended, blessed, polluted, forgotten, and found again. But holiness is not a quality the soil produces by itself. Someone claims it, someone marks it, someone says the words, someone records or fails to record that the words were said. In Swedish, the phrase vägd jord means earth that has been hallowed and blessed for burial. That is the clean meaning. It is the meaning a dictionary can hold without damage. It is the meaning a parish register can use without troubling itself. The dead are brought to vägd jord. They are placed within consecrated ground. They are no longer outside. Folklore asks a colder question, not whether the ground was blessed, not whether the rite was correct, not whether the bishop came, or the priest read, or the book was opened at the appointed place. Folklore asks what was paid. I do not mean paid in money. Money is the easiest kind of payment to remember, because it leaves accounts. 3 daler for lime, 16 for timber, 2 for the mason's lodging, a mark to the boy who carried the letter. Those payments survive well. They are proud of themselves in the way numbers are. The other payments survive differently. They survive as roots children are told not to take, as stones the cleaner does not step over, as a ladder left unmounted, as prints swept from frost before morning service, as a body that returns to the dock because the report closed before the truth did, as a sealed tape with a note requiring whoever opens it to decide again. That is what this reel is about. Not churches, not exactly. Not ghosts, not exactly. It is about what people put in the ground so that the living may continue to walk over it. I should say something about the folklore before the first account. The word is kyrkogrim. In Swedish, kyrkogrim. In Danish, kyrkogrim. In parts of the Norwegian material, related names appear as well, though the forms vary. The tradition is not uniform. Folklore almost never is. In its simplest form, the kyrkogrim is the guardian of a church and its churchyard. It walks after dark. It keeps order among the graves. It watches against those who would profane the ground. It may appear as a black dog, or a lamb, or a horse, or another animal whose shape depends on the place where the account was told. The explanation often given is that the first living creature buried in the foundation of a church became its guardian. Sometimes a lamb beneath the altar, sometimes a dog under a wall, sometimes a horse, a rooster, or some other animal placed where the building began. There are 2 cautions here, and I want them clear before we continue. The first is regional. The kyrkogrim is not equally strong in every Swedish province. The best-known Swedish material belongs especially to the south and southwest and to Danish-influenced tradition. When the tale I am about to play places the belief in Helsing land, we are not hearing a textbook distribution map. We are hearing one parish's account of what it said about itself. That is a different thing. It is not weaker. It must simply be named for what it is. The second caution is historical. Animal sacrifice, ritual deposition, and the placing of animal remains in meaningful ground are all real subjects of northern archaeology. They are not rumors. They are not inventions of story collectors. But a foundation legend is not the same thing as a confirmed foundation act. A parish saying there is a dog under the wall is not proof of a dog. A mason refusing a wall is not proof of what the mason saw. The story does not become more true if I pretend otherwise. Hedvig knew this. On the back of the first field card she wrote, "The parish's behaviour is better evidence than the parish's explanation." That is where we will begin, not with the dog, with the behaviour. Hedvig recorded Brita Sjur Bloom on the 18th of October, 1962. The tape was made in Brita's kitchen, at a table placed too near the stove. You can hear it in the first minute of the recording. Not heat exactly. Heat does not record. But the stove changes the room. The wood ticks inside it. The kettle shifts before it boils. There is the small dryness in Brita's voice that comes from sitting close to iron in October. She was 83 years old, born in 1879. She had lived in the same parish in Hälsingland all her life, except for 4 months as a girl, when she had been sent to an aunt near Eustal after her mother died. She mentions the aunt only once. She does not speak of her mother at all. Hedvig does not press. Brita had been cleaner at the parish church from 1903 to 1917, 14 years. She says this with no pride and no complaint. It was work. Work does not become more interesting to the person who did it simply because a folklorist arrives 60 years later with a tape recorder. That is one of the things I appreciate about this account. Brita does not tell a ghost story. She tells Hedvig how the church was opened, where the keys were kept, which window froze first, which mats had to be lifted in damp weather, how ash was taken from the iron stove without leaving grey dust along the aisle, how the brass was polished, how a cleaner learned not to strike the pew ends with the bucket because the sound carried strangely up into the tower. Only after nearly 12 minutes does Hedvig ask about the south wall. She asks as if the question has only just occurred to her. I do not believe it had. By 1962, Hedvig had become very good at letting a question arrive in the room long after she herself had carried it there. Brita answers without surprise. She says, "There was a dog there." Hedvig asks whether Brita means a living dog. Brita says no. Then she adds, "Not living in my time." That is all. No lowered voice, no hesitation, no pleasure in frightening the young woman at the table, only the correction of a practical misunderstanding. The church itself is not named in the script. I have decided not to name it. Hedvig did. Her field card gives the parish, the church, and the distance from the rectory to the south wall in steps. The church is real. It still stands. There is a road past it now. There is a small parking area. The old south wall has been repaired more than once. There are people buried there whose grandchildren are still living. I have no reason to involve them. The account does not require it. If you are from Hälsingland, you may think you know the church. You may be right. You may also be wrong. Let it stay that way. Brita describes the building as low and long, with the tower at the west end and the oldest stones in the southern foundation. The church, she says, had been altered so many times that no one could agree which parts belonged to which century. The priest had one answer. The schoolmaster had another. The men who repaired the roof had a third, based on nail heads and beams. The old women had a fourth, which they did not call an answer. They called it remembering. Britta herself did not care much about the centuries. She cared about damp. She cared about soot. She cared about the place where melting snow ran from boots and collected near the second pew on the north side. She cared about the window catchers which stuck in March. She cared about the white cloth on the altar which yellowed if it was stored in the wrong chest. This is why I trust her more than I would trust a more dramatic witness. She begins with maintenance. Most true fear does. The church was opened before morning service by the sexton. If the weather was severe, Britta came with him. The two of them entered by the side door. The sexton lit the stove when the season required it. Britta shook out the mats, checked the aisle, and wiped the damp from the window ledges. In Advent, she brushed wax from the candle stands. After funerals, she cleaned sand from the floor, because in winter the men who carried the coffin brought half the road in with them on their boots. Hedvig asks whether Britta was ever afraid in the church. Britta says, "Not when I was working." Hedvig asks if work made the church less frightening. Britta says, "Work tells you where to put your hands." This is one of the sentences Hedvig marked. There is a small blue line beside it on the transcript. No comment, only the line. I have thought about it often. Work tells you where to put your hands. It does not tell you what is true. It tells you what to do next. For many older rules, that may have been enough. Everyone in the parish knew about the south wall. Britta says everyone. Then, because she is careful, she corrects herself. Everyone who belonged to the parish knew. That was not the same as everyone living there. The priest knew, the schoolmaster knew, the parish council knew, the cleaners knew, the grave digger knew, the children knew. Though children knew it in the ordinary, loose way, children know things adults have not directly told them. They knew where not to play. They knew which stones not to step over. They knew which dares were not dares. The official position was that there was nothing beneath the wall. Britta uses the word official herself. She smiles when she says it. You can hear the small shift in the recording, not amusement, something drier. The official position was that the story of the dog was only a story. Children were told not to climb the south stones because the mortar was old. Women carrying water around the church were told to take the longer path because the ground was uneven. The grass was not cut close there because the scythe caught on stone. The sexton did not stack tools against that part of the wall because damp gathered there and ruined the handles. There was always a reason. Hedvig asks whether the mortar was old. Britta says, "All mortar is old if you wait." Hedvig asks whether it was loose. Britta answers, "No, that was why we did not step there." The sentence is almost nothing. It is also the centre of the first account. The parish did not avoid the south wall because the stones were weak. The stones were strong. That was the problem. The wall held. It had held through frost, thaw, repairs, new roofs, new priests, new graves, and all the ordinary violence by which a building survives its builders. The wall had done what it had been asked to do. That was why no one wished to ask what had been asked of it. Britta never saw the dog. This matters. I'm going to say it clearly because a lesser version of this account would improve it. It would put the animal at the edge of the churchyard in moonlight. It would let Britta glimpse black fur between the stones. It would give the listener eyes in the dark. Hedvig's recording gives us none of that. Britta never saw the dog. She saw the parish living as if the dog were there. The closest thing to a sighting is the frost. On winter mornings, before first service, when the air had been clear in the night and the ground had gone white, the sexton sometimes found prints along the south wall. Britta saw them twice. She is exact about that. Not many times, not every winter, twice. The first time was in January 1906. She had come early because a child was to be buried after the service, and the family had asked that the front pews be cleaned before the church opened. The sexton was already outside when she arrived. She found him standing with his broom in his hand, looking down along the wall. The prints began near the corner where the tower met the nave. They continued eastward for perhaps 12 steps. They did not come from the road. They did not cross the open snow. They were simply there, close to the stones, as if whatever had made them had come up from the wall itself and walked beside it. Britta says they were not dog prints. Hedvig asks how she knew. Britta says because she had seen dogs. Hedvig asks whether they were wolf. Britta says because she had seen wolves too. Then she grows impatient, not with fear, but with the uselessness of categories. She says, "They were what they were. He swept them." The sexton swept the prints away before the congregation arrived. He did not cross himself. He did not call the priest. He did not send Britta home. He swept. He cleared snow from the steps. He shook the broom against the low wall and went inside to light the stove. Britta tells this as church work. That is the part I find difficult to let go of. A parish can hide a thing from itself by making the hiding part of ordinary work. The second time Britta saw the prince was 6 years later, in 1912. By then she had been married 9 years. She had one living child and one in the ground. She does not say this at the place in the story where another teller would say it. It appears earlier, in answer to a question about why she had stopped cleaning for 3 months in 1910. Hedvig notes the dates quietly. In 1912 the prints were shorter, only 4 marks. They faced the wall, not along it, toward it, as if something had stood there in the dark and waited. Britta did not sweep them. That was the sexton's work. She went inside. She cleaned the wax from the candle stand. She polished the brass. She did not look again until after the service. By then the sun had taken the frost. There was nothing to see. Hedvig asks whether Britta told anyone. Britta says, "No one needed me to." That is the whole parish in 4 words. No one needed her to. The matter of the wall appears again in Britta's account when Hedvig asks about repairs. This is where the tale becomes, in my view, more difficult. Not more frightening, more difficult. The parish council met in March of 1893. Britta was 14 years old then. She was not present. Her grandfather was. He had been on the council for 9 years, and was, by her account, the kind of man who said very little in meetings because he preferred to decide before he entered the room. Britta says this with a granddaughter's patience, not admiration, not criticism, only the settled knowledge of a man whose habits had been in the house before she was. The south wall needed repointing, not rebuilding, not opening, only repointing. The winter had been hard, the frost had entered cracks in the outer mortar, and water had run down behind the stone where the snow lay against it. The church was not in danger. Britta is clear about this. No one believed the church would fall. That was not what worried them. Hedvig asks what did worry them. Britta says that it would have to be looked at. The council minutes, which Hedvig later found, are ordinary. I have seen her copy. She transcribed half a page in pencil and underlined nothing. The wording is dry. Funds assigned for repair to the southern foundation wall. Lime to be purchased. Stonework to be inspected. Mason to be retained from outside the parish if no suitable man could be found locally. It is a good sentence, that last one. Official language often is. It tells the truth as far as it is willing. There were suitable men locally. That was why the sentence had to be written as it was. The local men would not touch the wall. Britta says the first man asked was the sexton's cousin, who had done repairs on 3 farmhouses and 1 school building. He refused. He said he had work promised elsewhere. This was not true. Everyone knew it was not true. No one challenged him because the lie was performing a service. The second man was an older mason from the next parish. He refused with more honesty. He told Britta's grandfather that he would mend anything above the ground line. He would not take old lime from between those lower stones. If the council wanted the wall dressed, he said, they should send for someone who had not been carried past it as an infant. Britta's grandfather repeated that sentence many times. Britta heard it first when she was perhaps 16. She did not understand it then. She tells Hedvig she is not certain she understands it now. Then she adds, "But there are sentences you do not have to understand in order to obey." The council sent for a mason from Söderhamn. His name, in Britta's telling, was Per Olsson. Hedvig wrote the name down. I have not confirmed him. There are too many Per Olssons in the region, and the parish minutes do not give the mason's origin beyond outside the district. So I will call him Per Olsson, because that is what Britta called him. But I will not pretend the archive has done more work here than it has. He arrived in April. He lodged with the schoolmaster's sister, who kept a small room for travelling workers and visiting relatives. He was, Britta says, a quiet man. That is all anyone ever says in these accounts when they mean careful. He looked at the wall on the first day. He tapped the stone. He scraped at the outer line of mortar with the end of a small tool. He told the council the work would take less than a week if the weather held. The weather held. The work did not. On the second day, he removed old lime from a seam near the base of the wall. That is the most exact Britta can be, because that is the most exact her grandfather had been. A seam near the base, not the corner, not the middle, not beneath the window, near the base. He stopped before noon. He packed his tools. He did not enter the church to speak to the priest. He did not wait for the council. He walked back to the schoolmaster's sister's house, paid her for the room in full, and left before the evening meal. The next morning, a boy brought a letter. Britta's grandfather read it at the table. Britta was there. She remembers the blue line on the paper. She remembers her grandmother drying her hands on her apron before taking the letter after him. She remembers the way her grandfather folded it again and placed it beneath the sugar bowl, as if putting weight on the paper would also put weight on what it said. The letter said that Père Oul's son could not continue the work. It did not say why. It returned the deposit. It apologized for inconvenience. It asked that no further message be sent. Hedvig asks whether Britta ever saw the letter. Britta says yes. Hedvig asks whether the letter mentioned the dog. Britta says no. Hedvig asks whether it mentioned anything found in the wall. Britta says, "No careful man would write that in a letter." There is a silence after this on the tape. It is not one of my inserted silences. It is in the room. The stove ticks. Hedvig shifts in her chair. Britta breathes once through her nose. Then Hedvig asks whether the council discussed what Oul's son had seen. Britta says, "They discussed who would finish the wall." That is the answer. Not yes, not no. They discussed who would finish the wall. This is where the old way of living becomes easy to romanticize, and where it should not be. It is tempting to say that the parish knew what modern people have forgotten, that it understood boundaries, that it respected what lay under old stones, that it had inherited a grammar of fear more subtle than our own. Some of that may even be true, but it is not the whole truth. The parish also needed the wall repaired. It needed the church open. It needed baptisms, marriages, funerals, confirmations, collections, meetings, warmth in winter, and a building that did not show the village too clearly what it had been built on. So it did what communities often do when knowledge becomes inconvenient. It moved the knowledge to someone else. The second mason was younger. Britta does not remember his name. That may be because she never heard it. It may be because the parish, having used him, did not keep him in memory. That is speculation. I will mark it as such. He came from outside the district, not far outside, far enough. He had no grandparents in the parish. That is the sentence Britta uses. Not that he was brave, not that he was skeptical, not that he needed the money, only he had no grandparents in the parish. That is one of the coldest qualifications I have encountered in Hedvig's notes. The parish did not require courage. It required ignorance with hands. He finished the wall in 3 days. He did good work. Britta says this. Her grandfather said so too, though apparently not until years later. The line of mortar held. The damp did not return in that section for the rest of Britta's time as cleaner. Whatever Père Oul's son had opened, the younger mason closed. Hedvig asks whether anything happened to him afterward. Britta says she does not know. Hedvig asks whether that means nothing happened, Britta says, "It means he went home." That is all. There is no punishment in the account, no illness, no dream, no return by night to the south wall. He repaired the wall and went home. It would be easier if something had happened to him. It would make the tale cleaner. But the story Hedvig recorded is not clean. It is worse than punishment. It is use. The parish used the young man's not knowing to do what knowing men refused to do. Then it forgot him well enough that Britta, who remembered the colour of Per Ol's son's letter, could not remember the second mason's name. That is not a haunting. That is administration. It may be colder. The part of the account Britta tells last took place in 1909. By then she had been cleaner for 6 years. She was 29, married, healthy, she says, not given to seeing things. The phrase is hers. The sexton asked her to dust the inside of the bell tower before the first Sunday in Advent. The lower part had been done. The stairs needed wiping where birds had entered through a gap and left dry dirt along the boards. The bell ropes had shed fibres. There was ordinary work to do. Britta took a cloth and climbed. She says the air changed after the first landing. Not colder, not warmer, changed. Hedvig asks how. Britta says, "As if the room above had heard me." She climbed 3 more steps. Then she stopped. She did not hear a dog. She did not see a shape. The bell did not move. There was no scratching at the boards, no breath, no growl, no sign of anything a story could use easily. Only certainty. Not fear first, certainty first, fear afterward. If she continued upward, she would not be alone. And what waited above her had more right to the tower than she did. Britta climbed down. She folded the cloth. She told the sexton she had finished what could be finished. This is careful wording, not that she had finished what could be finished. The sexton looked at her for a while. Then he said, "You are not the first cleaner to do that." He did not ask what she had felt. She did not tell him. They went on with the Advent work. Candles were placed, the cloth was changed, the stove was checked. The parish came on Sunday and sang as it had sung every year. Britta never climbed into the tower again. She lived another 53 years. She raised 3 children. She buried her husband. She saw the church repaired twice more. She sat under the same tower for baptisms, weddings, funerals, and ordinary Sundays when nothing in particular was required of heaven. Hedvig asks whether she regrets not going up. Britta answers immediately, "I have regretted many things." Then she waits. On the tape, the pause is long enough that Hedvig almost asks another question. You can hear her inhale. Britta continues before she does. "I have not regretted being a coward in a high place that had already been paid for once." That is the end of Britta's account. I'm going to leave the dog where Britta left it, mostly unseen, mostly unexplained, not improved into a clearer haunting. That restraint matters. The supernatural element in this account is, by the standards of church folklore, almost modest. A dog under a wall, frost prints, a cleaner who knows not to climb. There are stronger tales in the archives if all one wants is a churchyard creature, but I do not think this account is about the dog. Hedvig did not think so either. On the back of Britta's field card she wrote, "The parish council in 1893 is the tale. The dog is the parish's explanation for the thing it has agreed not to open." I agree with her. I wish I did not. The parish had 2 records. One was written in minutes. Lime purchased, mason retained, wall repaired, deposit returned, no difficulty noted. The other record was kept in practice. Children did not step over the stones. Cleaners did not work after dark. The sexton swept prints before service. The first mason refused. The second mason was chosen for the absence of grandparents. We are very good now at making ground legible. We number plots. We digitize burial registers. We map property lines down to measurements so fine no person walking the ground could feel them beneath a boot. These are good things. They prevent theft. They prevent confusion. Sometimes they prevent cruelty. But I am less certain that legibility is the same as peace. Britta's parish knew where not to step. That knowledge did not make the parish better. It did not make it innocent. It may have made it more dangerous, because it allowed the parish to move the risk to someone who had not inherited the warning. Older communities did not always know more. Sometimes they only knew where not to step. Sometimes they also knew whom to send in their place. That is the first account. A dog under the wall, perhaps. A parish over it, certainly. Before the second account, I need to change the kind of dead we are speaking about. Not the ground. The ground remains. It is almost always the ground. The first account concerns a thing placed under a church wall so that the church, or the parish, or the idea of the parish could continue under protection. It is a foundation account. Whether or not there was ever a dog beneath those stones is not, finally, the most important question. The important question is what the parish did because it believed there might be. The second account concerns a different failure of ground. A man is dead. His body is recovered, it is examined, it is buried. The record closes, and still he walks. The Swedish word is gengångare, literally one who goes again, one who walks again. It is often translated as ghost, but ghost is too light a word for many of the accounts. The gengångare is not always transparent. He is not always distant. He is sometimes heavy, wet, angry, attached to a coat, a field, a debt, a bed, a name, a piece of work left unfinished, or the place where the living lied about him. The archival material is broad. One account may speak of a murder no one has admitted, another of a person not properly buried, another of the dead returning in everyday clothes, which could itself be a warning, another of a task left undone, another of the dead clinging to possessions because the living divided them badly. The pattern is not mechanical. Folklore is not a legal code. It does not say, if this wrong is done, this revenant will appear, and this act will settle it. That would be comforting, too comforting. What the pattern says, more often, is that some events do not end when the record says they ended. The body can be placed in fed jord. The priest can read. The doctor can sign. The village can return to work. And still the shape of the wrong remains standing somewhere it should not. This next account was recorded by Henrik on the 3rd of November 1962. It came from a man named Olof Sundberg. He had been a customs officer on the Bohuslän coast for 25 years. He was 68 when Henrik interviewed him. He was not from the village whose account he gave. That is part of why I believe he was able to give it. Those who belong to a place often know the most. They do not always have the most permission to speak. Olof Sundberg's account concerns Vintervik. That is not the village's name. Henrik changed it in her transcript. She did this rarely. When she did, she usually left a note explaining why. Here she wrote only, "Too many living." I have respected the change. Vintervik is enough. It is a small fishing community on the Bohuslän coast, close enough to other harbours that no one there was isolated in the romantic sense, and small enough that privacy was mostly a matter of politeness. People knew who drank. People knew who owed money. People knew which boat had come in late, which house had bought flour twice in 1 week, which husband had slept in the shed after shouting had been heard through a kitchen wall. Knowledge in such a place does not always become speech. Sometimes it becomes arrangement. A man is no longer asked to help mend a net. A woman receives bread without being made to request it. A child is sent on the longer path. A door is not knocked after dark. The older arrangements were not always kinder than modern ones. Sometimes they were merely quieter. Sometimes quiet was mercy. Sometimes it was complicity. The difference is not always visible until after the dead begin to walk. Olof was useful to Henrik because he stood at an angle to the village. He had lived there from 1928 to 1953, long enough to know who was related to whom, and which quarrels were older than the men who carried them. But he had not been born there. His father had not fished those waters. His grandfather was not in the churchyard. He was both inside and outside. That is often the position from which an account can be spoken. He tells Henrik at the beginning, "I am not saying I believe in gengångare." Henrik asks what he is saying. Olof says, "I am saying Edvard Mossberg did not stay finished." It would be easier if Edvard Mossberg had been a good man. He was not. Olof is clear about this, not cruelly clear, not with the satisfaction of a man relieved to speak ill of the dead, carefully clear. Edvard drank, not every day, according to Olof, not in the way that turns a man into a village joke and therefore lets everyone stop expecting anything better of him. He drank in runs, 3 days, 5. Once, according to the customs book, 11 days across 2 harbours and a trip inland from which he returned without his coat. He owed money to several households, small amounts mostly, the kind of debts that become more insulting by remaining small. A few kroner for lamp oil, half payment on a repaired net, a borrowed saw not returned, credit at the dockside cafe that the owner had stopped writing down because writing it had begun to feel like being mocked. He was harsh to his wife. Olof uses that word first, harsh. Then Hedvig waits. Olof changes it. No, that is too clean. He was systematic. There is a sound on the tape after this. Hedvig's pencil, I think. One line drawn under the word, systematic. Edvard's wife was named Karin in Hedvig's transcript. I do not know whether that was her name. This is one of the places where Hedvig's privacy changes, and mine will follow hers. Karin had married Edvard in 1929. By 1937, people in Vintervik had learned not to comment on bruises. Not because they did not see them, because they had decided that seeing without speaking was a form of neighborliness. This sentence is mine, not Olof's. I want that clear. Olof does not accuse the village this directly. He belonged to it enough not to. I am farther away. Distance has its own cowardices, but it has a few uses. The wrong done to Edvard later did not make Edvard good. It only made the wrong wrong. This is important. If the account is to remain honest, Edvard must be allowed to be what he was. The dead do not become innocent because the living failed them. The living do not become innocent because the dead were difficult to grieve. In September of 1937, Edvard accused a man named Albin of cheating him at cards. Hedvig changed Albin's surname. I will not give even the changed version. There is no need. The accusation was made in the dockside cafe, in the presence of perhaps a dozen people. Edvard had been drinking. Albin had not. This made it worse. Olof says the room went quiet in the way public rooms go quiet when everyone understands that what has been said cannot now be unsaid, and also understands that no one wants to be the person who heard it clearly. Albin stood. He told Edvard to take the accusation back. Edvard laughed. Then he said it again. 2 weeks later, a second matter became public. Edvard had been sleeping with the wife of another fisherman, a man named Johan in Hedvig's transcript. Again, I will leave the surname out. The relationship had not been secret exactly. Few things in Vintervik were secret in the strict sense. It had been held in that middle condition small places sometimes maintain, where everyone knows a thing and no one says it, because saying it would require an action no one wants to take. By November, Edvard had given 2 men reasons to hate him in public. He had given many others reasons to be relieved if he were no longer loud at the cafe, no longer owing money, no longer making Karin's face something the women had to see and pretend not to understand. Olof tells Hedvig, "That is why nothing was done." Hedvig asks what he means. Olof says, "There were too many reasons. When there are too many reasons, a village can call any one of them enough." Edvard drowned on the night of the 14th of November, 1937. The water in Vintervik harbour was very cold. Olof says this twice, not dramatically, as if the temperature were a fact that had to be placed on the table before any other fact could sit beside it. There had been drinking on the dock. Edvard was there. Albin was there. Johan was there. 2 other men had been present earlier in the evening, but left before midnight. This is according to the statements given afterward. At some point after midnight, Edvard went into the water. The 2 men said he had slipped. They said he had stepped backward while laughing, missed the edge in the dark, and gone down between the dock and a moored boat. They said they had tried to reach him. They said the water was black. They said he did not surface where they expected. All of these things may be true. That is part of the trouble. A lie does not have to be made of false sentences. Sometimes a lie is made of true sentences, arranged around an absence. The body was found 3 days later. It had been caught beneath the forward line of a fishing boat whose owner was away visiting relatives in Uddevalla. The doctor noted bruising on the upper arms and shoulders. The explanation given was contact with the underside of the boat and the dock timber. The water had moved him. The cold had stiffened him. Wood had marked him. The verdict was misadventure. That is the word Olof uses in English when Hedvig asks him, much later in the interview, how he would translate the official finding. In Swedish, he says, it was written more plainly, accidental drowning. No one in Vintervik who lived through November of 1937 believed that was the whole truth. Olof says this. Then he corrects himself because he is careful. No one he respected believed it. Hedvig asks whether anyone pursued the matter. Olof says no. Hedvig asks whether Karin, the widow, asked questions. Olof is silent for some time. Then he says, she had been asking questions for 8 years. No one had answered those either. That is the sentence that makes the second account more than a revenant tale. The village had already practiced not answering Karin. By the time Edvard died, silence was not a new skill. It was habit. The funeral was held 6 days after the body was found. Edvard was buried in the parish churchyard in consecrated ground. The priest read. Karin stood in black. Albin and Johan attended. Olof says they stood at the back with the men who did not want to be noticed standing too near the grave, and did not want to be noticed staying away. Afterward, people came to Karin's house. Coffee was poured. Bread was sliced. Condolences were spoken. No accusation was. The record closed. The village resumed. Then spring came. Olof gives Hedvig 5 incidents. He numbers them himself. That matters. Hedvig does not impose the structure afterward. Olof arrives with it. The numbering is not dramatic, it is defensive. He has told this account before, I think, or at least told it to himself, and has learned that if the details are not placed in order, they begin to behave like village talk. He does not want village talk. He wants sequence. Sequence is not proof, but it is a form of respect. The first incident came in April 1938, 5 months after the drowning. The ice had gone from the harbour. The first herring work had begun. Men were repairing gear before the season took full hold. This is how the dead entered work. A net came up at dawn with a knot in it no one in Vintervik should have tied. That is Olof's phrasing. Not could have tied, should have. The net belonged to Albin. He had taken his boat out before sunrise with his oldest son and another man. The weather was poor but not dangerous. There was low cloud. The water had the dull pewter colour it has before rain. They found the knot when they brought the gear in after a short set near the outer rocks. It was tied near the lower line, not in a place where ordinary handling would have made it. It was tight, deliberate, wrong for the gear. The knot was a kasnut. Olof spells it for Hedvig. She asks him to describe it. He does, but I will not try to reconstruct the knot here from his spoken description. That would be false precision. What matters is what the men in Vintervik knew about it. It was not a local knot. It belonged, in their understanding, farther north. Edvard had grown up near Sundsvall, where Olof says the knot was used. He had been mocked for it when he first came south. Olof says fishermen are practical men until another man is practical in a different dialect. Then practicality becomes arrogance. Edvard kept tying the knot for nearly a year after he came to Vintervik. Then he stopped, at least publicly. But everyone who had known him in those first years remembered it. That is how small humiliations survive. Albin cut the knot out of the net. He did not untie it. His son asked why. Albin slapped him. Not hard enough to injure, Olof says, but hard enough that the other man in the boat remembered it and told the story in the cafe before noon. By evening, half of Vintervik knew about the knot. By the next morning, everyone did. No one said Edvard's name in Albin's hearing. This was understood as kindness. It may have been. It may also have been fear taking the shape of manners. The knot appeared again 6 times across the spring, not always in Albin's nets, twice in gear belonging to men who had not been near the dock that night, once in a net belonging to the widow's brother, once in gear that had been hung indoors and found altered before it was taken out. That last one is the detail Olof dislikes. You can hear it. His voice tightens slightly. The water can be blamed for many things. A locked shed is less generous. Then the knot stopped. For 3 weeks there was nothing. The village almost allowed itself to be relieved. The second incident came in June. It was found by Albin's son. He was 11. Olof gives his name. Hedvig writes it down and later crosses it out. I will not restore it. The boy had gone to check the mooring before dawn. There had been a wind in the night, not a storm, enough to make boys useful, enough to give fathers a reason to send them out before breakfast. The tide was low. The dock planks were wet and black. The boy saw footprints coming up from the water, not from the road, not along the dock, from the ladder where men climbed after working on hulls. Bare feet, Olof says, or feet in stockings. The boy was not sure. They crossed the dock. They went along the path between the fish shed and the rope house. They stopped at the back door of Albin's house. There the marks overlapped, as if the person had stood for some time. Then they turned and went back the same way, down to the ladder, into the water. The boy woke his father. Albin refused to come look. He told the boy to stop talking nonsense and wash before breakfast. The boy went to his mother instead. By the time she came out, the tide had risen far enough to take the lower marks. By full daylight, there was nothing anyone could be asked to explain. The boy told 3 other children. One of them told an aunt. The aunt told the cafe owner. By evening, Olof knew. So did Karin. Hedvig asks how he knows Karin knew. Olof says, because that evening she put salt on her back step. Hedvig asks what that meant. Olof says he does not know. Then, because he is honest, he says everyone knew. Not the meaning, the act. Salt at a door is an old gesture in many places. Protection, boundary, hospitality refused or controlled. One must be careful not to make a single grammar for all of it. In Vintervik, in June of 1938, Karin salted her back step. The footprints did not return to Albin's house. That is all the account allows me to say. The third incident is the one Olof hesitates over. Not because it is the most violent. It is not violent at all. He hesitates because it involves a child. The girl's name in Hedvig's transcript is Greta. She was 3 years old. She lived 2 houses from Karin, Edvard's widow, and was the niece of Johan, the second man who had been on the dock the night Edvard drowned. She had been an infant when Edvard died, too young, Olof says, to have carried his face in memory. In August of 1938, Greta's mother left her outside the house for a moment while she went back in for a shawl. The girl was sitting on the step with a piece of bread. There were women at the next house cleaning fish. There were men within sight on the dock. This was not an unattended child in an empty lane. This was a child in the middle of village life. When her mother returned, Greta asked who the wet man was. The mother thought she meant one of the fishermen. Greta said no. The one with the brown beard. The one with the torn place on his coat. The one who smelled like the harbour when the water goes down. This is the first smell in the account. Not rot, not death. The harbour at low tide. Salt, weed, old wood, and what the sea gives back before taking it again. The mother asked what the man had said. Greta answered, "Tell Uncle Johan I am still here." That is the whole message. Not accusation, not confession, not threat. Only location. I am still here. The mother took Greta inside. She did not go to Johan. She went first to Karin. Olof says this quietly, and Hedvig asks him to repeat it. He does. Greta's mother went to Karin, not Johan. That is a village's real map. Not roads, not property lines. The order in which news is carried when no one wants to be responsible for carrying it. Karin listened. She asked whether the child had been frightened. Greta's mother said no. Karin asked whether the man had touched her. Greta's mother said no. Karin said, "Then let him speak to those he came for." Olof did not hear this directly. He had it from Greta's mother years later. He says he trusts it because the woman disliked making sentences memorable. That is an excellent reason to trust a sentence. The message reached Johan before night. No one admitted carrying it. He did not sleep in his house that evening. He slept in his boat. In the morning, he said he had done so because the air indoors was too close. No one challenged him. The fourth incident came on the anniversary of Edvard's death. The 14th of November, 1938, 1 year after the drowning. It concerns a clock. Olof says Edvard bought it for Karin during their first year of marriage. It had hung in the kitchen. It was not expensive. It was not old. It was the kind of clock a young husband buys when he wants the house to contain a sign that he is capable of providing one unnecessary thing. The clock had stopped in 1934. No one repaired it. Karin left it on the wall. Olof says women sometimes leave broken things where they are because taking them down would require explaining what broke first. On the night of the anniversary, Karin's sister was staying with her. This was not openly because of the date. It was because Karin had been ill the week before, and because a woman alone in November can reasonably be offered company without anyone having to say why the offer is made. At 20 minutes past midnight, the clock struck once. Not 12, not 1. Once. A single chime from a clock that had not run in 4 years. Karin and her sister both heard it. Neither spoke immediately. Olof had this from the sister. He says she was not an imaginative woman. That is another sentence that appears often in these files. I have never known what to do with it. The sister rose first. She lit the lamp. She looked at the clock. The hands had not moved. They still stood at 10 minutes to 4, where they had stood since 1934. She asked Karin whether she should take it down. Karin did not answer at first. She sat on the edge of the bed with her hands in her lap. Her sister said later that she looked less frightened than emptied. Then Karin said, "No." The sister asked whether she was afraid. Karin said, "It has been silent 4 years. It can be silent again without help." Olof says this sentence was repeated in Vintervik for years, as proof that Karin had been strong. He does not think that is what it proved. He thinks it proved she was tired of helping the village decide what her grief meant. The clock did not chime again that night. It did not chime the next day. According to the sister, who visited often, it never chimed again. Hedvig asks Olof what Karin made of the sound. Olof says he never asked her. Hedvig asks why. Olof says, "Because by then I had begun to understand that not every question is honest just because it is accurate." This is the first place in the interview where Hedvig stops taking notes. You can hear it. The pencil ceases. The tape goes on. The fifth incident came in the spring of 1939. It ended the returns. Or, more carefully, it was followed by no more returns that Olof knew how to name. The boat belonged to Johan. He had pulled it out for repairs after a hard winter. There was damage near the bow, nothing severe, enough to require attention before the main season. He and another man turned the boat and began removing a loose length of interior planking. Inside, lodged where neither tide nor hand should have placed it, they found a folded paper. Small, greyed by damp but not destroyed, folded 3 times. The other man wanted to throw it away unopened. Johan did not. Olof says this is the only brave thing Johan did in the whole account. Then he corrects himself. No, not brave. Compelled. Johan opened the paper. Inside were 5 words in pencil. Olof says the handwriting was identified by Edvard's cousin, who had letters from him dating before the marriage. I have not seen those letters. Hedvig did not see those letters. This remains Olof's report of what the village accepted. The words were, "I am still owed. Not I was killed, not I know, not you did it. I am still owed." The dead, if this was the dead, spoke in the language the village had already used for everything else. Debt, credit, owing. Accounts left open because everyone had grown tired of seeing them. Johan folded the paper again. He put it in his coat. He did not continue repairing the boat that day. 6 weeks later, he left Vintervik. He went first to Gothenburg. In the autumn of 1939, he left Sweden. Olof says Canada. Hedvig writes Canada with a question mark after it. Albin left before Johan. This is important. He did not leave because of the folded paper, at least not directly. He left after the footprints, and after the knots, and after a winter in which, according to Olof, he had begun to step around puddles on the dock even in daylight. In February 1939, he sold his share in the boat to a cousin and moved inland. Not far. Far enough not to smell the harbour when the tide went out. After Johan left, the returns stopped. No more knots, no more prints, no messages from children, no clock, no paper. Karin stayed. She kept the house. She took in washing for several families. She refused one offer of marriage in 1942 and another in 1946. Olof says she laughed at the second, not unkindly. The man had been widowed twice and needed someone to manage his house. Karin told him she had already managed one man's house and had no wish to become skilled. The clock remained on the wall. It was still there when Olof left Vintervik in 1953, still stopped at 10 minutes to 4. Hedvig asks Olof whether he believes Edvard returned. Olof says, "I believe Edvard was not finished." Hedvig asks whether that is the same thing. Olof says, "In Vintervik it was." This is an honest answer. It is not a satisfying one. The village did not become better after Edvard's returns. Olof is clear about this too. It became easier. Albin left. Johan left. Karin was treated more gently. The cafe stopped carrying certain debts without writing them down. For a few years, Olof says, men on the dock were less quick to laugh when another man stumbled near the edge. These are not justice. They are adjustments. A village can adjust after a wrong without admitting the wrong. That is one of the ways a village survives itself. Hedvig asks whether anyone ever accused Albin or Johan openly. Olof says no. Hedvig asks whether anyone confessed. Olof says no. Hedvig asks whether Karin ever spoke of what she believed. Olof says Karin had already spent years learning what speech was worth there. I want to be careful here. It is easy to hear this as a story where the dead did what the living would not. That is true within the account. It is also the danger of the account. Because if the dead can correct the village need not correct itself. If Edvard can return, then no one has to ask why Karin was left unanswered for 8 years. If knots and footprints can drive men away, no one has to admit that everyone knew enough to act earlier and chose not to. The dead are very useful in stories like this. They do the work. They carry the accusation. They make the living uncomfortable enough to move, but not uncomfortable enough to confess. That is not justice. It is bookkeeping delegated to the dead. Hedvig's note after Oluf's interview is only 3 lines. She writes, "Do not call this justice." Then, under it, "Call it bookkeeping." Then, after a space, "The village was comforted by the return because the return spared it from becoming honest." I have read that last sentence many times. I think it is one of the hardest things Hedvig wrote. Hard because it is cold. Harder because I think it is right. I do not think Edvard's return made Vintervik just. I think it made Vintervik comfortable enough not to become just. There is a difference. It is not a small one. The old stories often know this better than modern retellings do. Modern stories want the dead to reveal the truth. They want the body to speak and the guilty to tremble and the community to heal. Folklore is usually less generous. It knows that a village can live for a very long time after being corrected only partly. The question is not whether Edvard walked, not for me. The question is why Vintervik needed him to. And the answer Oluf gives, though he does not say it as an answer, is that Vintervik had built a life around not answering Karin. When Edvard died, that habit remained. The gengångare did not break the habit. It only made the silence easier to live with. That is the second account. A man in the harbour, perhaps. A village on the dock, certainly. There is one more account. Before I play it, I need to return to the note on the box. Decide again before playing. I have said the words once already. I am saying them again because repetition changes them. The first time they were a warning. Now they are an instruction. The first 2 accounts were difficult, but they were not sealed. Britta's account of the South Wall was filed under kyrkogrim and parish tradition. Olof's account of Vintervik was filed under gengångare, coastal tradition, and unresolved death. Hedvig had reservations about both. Her notes make that clear, but she made them available within the order of her own archive. The third account she did not in the same way. There are several reasons a researcher seals material. Some are legal, some are practical. Some concern living persons, some concern false accusation. Some concern a promise made at a kitchen table when the recorder was still running and the person with the recorder understood a little too late that permission to record is not always permission to publish. This seal is stranger. It does not say, "Do not play." It does not say, "Closed." It does not say, "Private." It says, "Decide again." Hedvig made future access possible. She also made it impossible to pretend access was automatic. That is a different kind of refusal than Esther Lindberg's in Reel 5. Esther refused to give Hedvig the workings. She said the workings were debts, and that if she gave them, she would be transferring the debt. Hedvig accepted that refusal. Pastor Lindström did not refuse. He gave Hedvig the account. He gave it carefully. He gave it because, I think, he could no longer bear being the only person who knew it. That is not the same as wanting it public. Hedvig could not refuse to know after he had told her. So she built a refusal around the knowledge. She kept the reel. She sealed it. She required the next person to understand that listening would be an act. I am that next person, and if you continue, so are you. The sealed reel is smaller than the others. Not physically. The tape box is the same size. The reel itself is ordinary quarter-inch tape. But the object feels smaller because the writing on it has been reduced to what could not be avoided. On the spine, Reel 6, Account 3. Below that, Henrik Lindström, Långnatt, 12th November 1962. Långnatt is already a changed name here. I want that clear before the account begins to collect details around it. Do not use it as a map. And on the folded strip around the box, decide again before playing. That is all. No subject heading. No folklore term. No cross-reference. No indication of kyrkogrim, foundation, burial, child, church or parish hall. Hedvig removed the handles by which a future cataloguer might comfortably pick it up. There is one additional note inside the box. It is on thin paper, folded around the leader. The paper has browned more than the cardstock. The handwriting is Hedvig's, but smaller than usual. The account is his. The decision to keep it is mine. Do not let either fact excuse the other. I read that sentence first 3 weeks ago. I closed the box. Then I opened it again the next night and read it again. There are some sentences one has to read several times before they become less clear. This was one of them. Before I give the account, I will give you my decision. Not because it settles the matter, because it does not. I have decided to play the recording. I have changed the parish name. Hedvig had already changed one workman's name in a later field note, and I have followed her. I will not identify the current church. I will not give coordinates. I will not say which deanery, which rural municipality, or which present parish grouping would now hold the records. The Långnatt of this reel is and is not the Långnatt on the map. I have left it that way deliberately. I have checked the persons named in the account as far as I can. Pastor Henrik Lindström died in 1981. His wife died in 1989. The churchwarden named by Lindström died in 1976. The 3 workmen are also dead. The university man whom Lindström says he consulted died in 1990. There is no living person, so far as I can determine, whom my playing of this account can injure by direct identification. That does not mean no harm is possible. Harm is not always attached to a living name. I have considered whether the parish can be harmed. I have considered whether the dead can be harmed. I have considered whether the account, if hidden forever, would become safer or merely easier. I have considered whether playing it is courage, vanity, scholarship, trespass, or only the habit of an old archivist who has mistaken access for duty. I do not know. I want that sentence here before the account begins. I do not know. But I know this. Hedvig did not destroy the tape. Pastor Lindström did not ask her to destroy it. The note does not say, "Do not play." It says, "Decide again." I have decided. That does not make the decision clean. Pastor Henrik Lindström was 54 when Hedvig interviewed him. He sounds older. This may be the tape. It may be the room. It may be that certain forms of office age the voice before the face. The interview took place in a parlour at the rectory, not the study. Lindström had refused the study. Hedvig notes this. She writes, "He did not want the desk between us." There is a clock in the room. It is soft but steady. Every few minutes, paper moves. At one point, a cup is placed too quickly on a saucer, and Lindström apologizes. His apology is not for the sound, it is for being startled by the sound. He begins before Hedvig asks her first question. "I have asked you here because I think you may know what kind of thing this is." Hedvig says, "What kind of thing?" Lindström says, "A thing that has been kept because no one knew where else to put it." There are interviews in which Hedvig leads. This is not one of them. For the first 8 minutes, Lindström speaks as if he has already rehearsed every sentence and found each one inadequate before using it anyway. He tells her he has been pastor at Almvik since 1949. He says the parish is small, old, not important. He says this last phrase with a kind of defensive affection I recognize from many rural clergy and local historians. Not important, meaning not important to the people who decide importance elsewhere. The church itself is medieval in origin, though altered repeatedly. The parish hall stands to the southwest of the churchyard, on ground that had once belonged to an older outbuilding. The hall was repaired in 1957 after damp was found in one wall. That is how the account begins, not with a legend, with damp. Again, maintenance. The old stories enter through the places buildings fail. Hedvig asks whether Lindström had heard any local foundation legends before 1957. He says yes. Then he corrects himself. Not legends, remarks. Hedvig asks him to explain the difference. He says, "A legend is something people know they are telling. A remark is something said while lifting a chair." The remarks concerned the southwest corner. Nothing formal, nothing he had thought worth recording. An old woman saying that the grass there should not be cut short. A former church warden saying that ladders leaned badly in that place. A child refusing to retrieve a ball from the corner and being told by an adult not to make herself foolish. He had dismissed all this. Not contemptuously, he says, wearily. Every parish has corners. Every parish has remarks. A pastor cannot make doctrine out of every place where old women lower their voices. Hedvig asks whether he regrets dismissing them. Lindström says, "Regret is not quite the word. I think dismissal was part of my office." This is the first moment in the interview where he sounds like a man who has had years to become exact. Dismissal was part of my office. Not failure, not arrogance. Office. He continues, "A parish brings many things to a priest. Some are sins, some are illnesses, some are weather, some are loneliness. Some are stories that have survived because the people telling them need a listener with a collar. One learns to distinguish what must be acted on from what must be allowed to pass through the room." Hedvig asks which kind this was. Lindström answers, "I thought it was the second kind. Then I was wrong." In May of 1957, the parish hall was opened for repair. The word "opened" is Lindström's. He uses it before he realizes what it will mean in the account. Afterward, he says "repaired," but the first word was "opened." The work was ordinary. Damp had entered the lower wall. Plaster had lifted. There was a smell in the small room where hymnals and folding chairs were kept. Not rot, not mould exactly. Cold lime and old cloth. The parish council approved repair. 3 men were hired. Lindström names them. I will give only the surnames as Hedvig preserved them in her protected note. Eriksson, Persson, Mattsson. One of those, according to Hedvig, is altered. I do not know which. That is as she intended. The men began with the exterior wall. They removed loose stone. They cleared damp earth from the foundation line. They found nothing unusual the first day. On the second day, near noon, Mattsson called for Lindström. Lindström remembers the call because Mattsson did not use his title. He did not call pastor. He called his surname. Lindström says this is how he knew, before seeing anything, that the men had stepped outside ordinary repair. He went to the southwest corner. The men had removed a flat stone from low in the foundation. Behind it was a cavity, small, dry, though the wall around it was damp, lined roughly with smaller stones. Lindström says the cavity was not accidental. Hedvig asks how he knows. He says, "Because accident is careless. This was careful." Inside the cavity was cloth, or what remained of cloth. He corrects himself several times here, not cloth as one finds it in a drawer, not cloth as one finds it in a grave that has been wet. Fibres, browned, held together by dryness and position more than by strength. And within the cloth, bone. I am going to be careful with this. So is Lindström. He does not describe a face. He does not describe a whole body. He does not use the word skeleton. He says bones, small bones. He says they were arranged, not thrown, not spilled, arranged. Hedvig asks whether he knew at once that they were human. Lindström says no. Then he says, "I knew before I knew." That sentence is dangerous. It is the kind of sentence people use when they want instinct to do the work of evidence. Hedvig seems to recognize this. She asks again, "What did you know and how?" Lindström takes a long time to answer. Then, "I knew the men had stopped being workmen." That is better. Not proof, observation. The three men stood differently. They had taken off their caps. No one had told them to. No one had said prayer. No one had named what was in the wall. But the caps were in their hands. Lindström says that was the moment he understood the parish had already changed around the cavity. Before identification, before law, before archaeology, before theology. The men had uncovered something that made them remove their caps. Then Eriksson pointed to a small object caught in the cloth. A coin, darkened, thin, not loose, but lodged near the edge of the wrapping. Lindström did not remove it then. He told the men to cover the opening with boards. He told them to go home for the day. They obeyed. No one argued. Henrik asks whether he contacted the police. Lindström says no. Henrik asks whether he contacted the diocese. He says no. Henrik asks whether he contacted anyone. He says, not that day. That evening, Lindström went back alone. He says he should not have. Then he says he does not know what should means here. He took a lamp. He took the key to the parish hall. He did not tell his wife where he was going, which he offers to Hedvig as if it were a confession belonging to the same category as the rest. Perhaps it does. The boards were still in place. No one had disturbed them. He moved them himself. He knelt by the wall. The air from the cavity was dry and cold. Not the damp wall smell that had begun the repair. Something older. Hedvig asks what it smelled like. Lindström says, like the inside of a book no one has opened, because everyone knows which page is there. That is not an answer exactly. But by this point in her work, Hedvig had learned that exact answers are not always truer. She does not press him toward mould, dust, lime, cloth, bone. She lets the sentence stand. Lindström removed the coin, only the coin. He says this 3 times across the interview. Only the coin, only the coin, only the coin. Repetition is not always emphasis. Sometimes it is defense. The coin was not clean enough for him to read. He wrapped it in paper. He replaced the boards. He went back to the rectory. The next morning, he telephoned a man he knew at the university in Lund. The man's name is given on the tape. I will not give it here. Not because he did anything wrong, because Lindström's account gives him no fair chance to answer what was made of his opinion. Lindström sent the coin by registered post. He did not write a full explanation. He said it had been found in an old wall during repair and asked if the man could give an approximate date. This was, even in his own account, a half-truth. The answer came 2 weeks later. The coin was medieval, 14th century likely. The letter, according to Lindström, said the condition made precision difficult. It asked whether there was archaeological context. It suggested that if the find was associated with structural remains, a proper report should be made. Lindström did not make one. This is where I would like the account to provide a reason that resolves him. It does not. He tells Hedvig he thought of the law. He thought of the diocese. He thought of the workmen. He thought of the families with graves near the southwest corner. He thought of the parish hall, where children's lessons were held on Wednesdays and coffee was served after funerals. He thought of the old women whose remarks he had dismissed. He thought of the possibility that he had found nothing more than a disturbed burial, moved in some earlier repair, and hidden by ignorance rather than sacrifice. He thought of the possibility that he had found exactly what he feared he had found. Hedvig asks which possibility he believed. Lindström says, "Belief was not the office I had to perform." There is the word again, office. He says, "A priest is asked sometimes not what is true, but what must be done before the next bell rings." I do not know if this is wisdom. I do not know if it is evasion. I suspect it is both. Lindström waited until the workmen returned. He did not tell them about the coin. He told them the cavity was not to be opened further. He told them the wall would be closed from the outside and reinforced around it. Eriksson asked whether that was proper. Lindström says this surprised him. Not because Eriksson was a careless man, because he had hoped no one else would place the question in words. He answered, "No, but it may be necessary." That answer appears to have satisfied no one. It also stopped the discussion. The work took 2 days. The men worked quietly. Mattsson refused to turn his back to the open cavity. Persson sang hymns under his breath and stopped whenever Lindström came near. Eriksson did the careful stonework. Lindström says he has never seen better. Before the final stone was placed, Lindström asked the men to leave him alone. They did. He knelt at the wall. He read the prayer for the dead, not the full burial service, not because he did not think it deserved one, because a full burial service would have required a body, a name, a grave, witnesses, record, date, and bell. He had almost none of those. He had remains. He had no name. He had a place that was already both grave and concealment. He had 3 workmen waiting outside, pretending not to listen. He had a coin wrapped in paper on his desk. He had a parish whose children would arrive the next week for lessons, if he let the work finish. So he read what he could read. He says he stumbled once, not because he forgot the words, because halfway through he understood that he was not certain whether he was burying the child or assisting the first burial to continue. Hedvig asks what he did with the coin. Lindström says he returned it to the cavity before the wall was closed. Hedvig asks why. He says, "Because taking it had made me the owner of the question." Then, "I wanted the question back where I had found it." This is the most troubling sentence in the account for me, not because it is obviously wrong, because I understand it. There are objects in archives that feel this way. Things removed from the place where they belonged badly and preserved in the place where they belong cleanly and made worse by the cleanliness. There are labels that are accurate and still feel like theft. There are catalogues that protect knowledge by stripping it of the conditions under which it knew how to behave. Lindström returned the coin. The final stone was placed. The wall was closed. The damp repair was completed. The parish hall reopened before the end of June. Children had lessons there. Coffee was served after funerals. Coats were hung on pegs along the repaired wall. The ground accepted the ordinary again, or appeared to. Hedvig asks whether anything happened afterward. Lindström says no. Then he says, "That is not true. Nothing happened loudly." The remarks stopped. That was the first thing. The old women no longer mentioned the southwest corner. The former church warden, who had once said ladders leaned badly there, began storing chairs against that wall without comment. Children retrieved balls from the grass. The unease did not increase. It withdrew. This did not comfort Lindström. It frightened him more. Hedvig asks why. He says, "Because it meant the parish had accepted what I had done." That sentence does not return me to judgment. It leaves me with the worse thought, that a community can accept an act without making the act right. The interview does not end with a revelation. It ends with fatigue. Lindström tells Hedvig he has not spoken of the matter to anyone since 1957. Not to his wife, not to the bishop, not to the next church warden, not to the men after the wall was closed. He says he asked Hedvig to come because he had read an article of hers on churchyard belief and thought she might know where the account belonged. Hedvig asks him where he thinks it belongs. Lindström says, "Not with me alone." That is why the tape exists. I am almost certain of it. Not because he wanted to expose the parish, not because he wanted absolution, because he wanted the knowledge to stop being singular. There is a kind of loneliness that does not come from being without people. It comes from being the only person who knows the shape of a burden. Lindström gave that shape to Hedvig. He made her less innocent by making himself less alone. Near the end of the interview, Hedvig asks whether he believes he chose rightly. Lindström laughs once, not with humour, with air. He says, "I believe I did the act I was capable of doing." Hedvig asks whether that is enough. He says, "It has had to be." The tape continues for another minute after that. No one speaks. The clock in the parlour continues. Paper moves once. At the very end, Lindström says, "You will know what to do with this." Hedvig does not answer before the tape ends. That absence is important. I do not think she knew. That night, in a boarding house 2 parishes away, Hedvig wrote 3 pages. Most of them are not notes on the account. They are notes on her own method. I will read only part. Henrik Lindström has given me the account because I am to him an archive. This is flattering only if one has not understood what an archive is. I am beginning to understand less and less. Then, if I catalogue this under kyrkogrim, I make it folklore. If I catalogue it under church repair, I make it administration. If I catalogue it under human remains, I make a claim the material cannot bear. If I destroy it, I make myself the final authority, which I am not. Then, there may be no honest category. There may only be honest difficulty. Below that, in smaller writing, I will keep the recording. I have not decided to make it available. And the final line. Some recordings exist so that one person is no longer alone with a burden. That is the smallest archive. It may also be the most honest. The next morning she sealed the reel. She wrote, "Decide again before playing." Then she placed it in the box with the others. That is Pastor Lindström's account. It is not proof of a find. It is not a claim I can ask you to treat as history. It is the record of one man giving Hedvig a burden he could no longer keep alone. Hedvig recorded it. Hedvig sealed it. I have played it. Those are the facts I can stand on. They are narrow. They are enough to make standing uncomfortable. The temptation here is to decide about Lindström. Was he right to close the wall? Was he wrong not to report it? Did he protect the parish? Did he repeat the burial? Did he give the unknown dead a prayer that had been missing for centuries? Did he assist the silence that had kept the dead unknown? The answer I distrust most is the one that arrives quickly. This is not because hesitation is wisdom. Hesitation can be cowardice, and often is. But speed, with this material, usually means one has chosen a side that lets one stop looking. I have not been able to stop looking. Not at the cavity. I have no image of the cavity that I trust. Not at the coin. The coin is too easy. It wants to become evidence. What I keep looking at is the note. Decide again before playing. Hedvig understood more after Lindström left her. I do not think she understood it as an idea. I think she understood it as a procedure. She could not make herself not know. She could not give the knowledge back to Lindström. She could not make it clean by cataloguing it under the nearest folklore term. She could not make it innocent by destroying it. So she made future listening difficult. That was her method. Not the method she began with in Reel 1. Not the method of the eager collector with fresh tape and a belief that preservation was usually better than loss. This was a later method. The method of a woman who had been refused by Esther Lindberg and trusted by Henrik Lindström, and had learned that both refusal and trust can place a burden in the hands. I do not know if I have honored that burden. I know only that I have not treated the seal as decoration. I have decided again. And now you have heard what I decided to play. That is the third account. Hedvig sealed the reel. I have played it. I want to say one more point. It is about Hedvig and about what I am beginning to understand about her work. In Reel 5, Esther Lindberg refused to give Hedvig the workings. Esther said that the workings were debts, and that if she gave them, she would be transferring the debt to Hedvig. She would not do that. Hedvig accepted the refusal. She wrote that night that some refusals are themselves the recording. Pastor Lindström did not refuse. He gave Hedvig the account. He gave her the debt. Hedvig accepted it. That is not a criticism. It may have been the kindest act available to both of them. But acceptance is not neutral. Once Lindström spoke, Hedvig knew. Once Hedvig recorded him, the knowing had a body outside his own. Once she sealed the real, the knowing became knowledge that could wait. And once I opened it, the waiting ended. This is the part of archival work that public language makes too clean. We say preservation. We say access. We say stewardship. We say cultural memory. These are not false words, but they are polished smooth by use. Sometimes an archive is only the place where one person's unbearable knowledge is made bearable by becoming someone else's. That may be necessary. It may even be merciful. It is not innocent. Hedvig understood this before I did. I think that is why Reel 6 frightened her. Not because of the church, not because of the south wall, not because of Edvard Mossberg on the dock, or the coin, or the cavity, or the sealed ground. Because, by the end of this reel, she had begun to understand that fieldwork is not only collection, it is participation. The questioner enters the chain. The recorder enters the chain. The archivist enters the chain. The listener enters the chain. No one owns the story afterwards. Ownership is too clean a word. One owes it. The first account gave us a parish that knew where not to step. It also gave us a parish willing to send in someone who did not know. The second gave us a village that let the dead do what the living would not. It also gave us a widow who had already learned what unanswered speech was worth. The third gave us a pastor who found, or believed he found, the old cost of a building still in use. It also gave us Hedvig's seal. 3 kinds of ground: consecrated, unquiet, sealed. 3 kinds of accommodation: do not step there. Let him walk until the men leave. Close the wall and decide again before playing. I am not going to tell you what to do with these. That would be easier for both of us. It would also be false. The old rules were not always beliefs. Sometimes they were instructions. Do not step there. Do not ask twice after evening. Do not take from the hill without leaving. Do not call a return justice, because justice would require the living to stand in daylight. Do not make a recording easy merely because it exists. We live now with other instructions. Some are better. Some have saved lives the old rules would have abandoned. Hospitals, courts, police when they do what they are meant to do. Records that can be checked. Maps that keep land from being stolen quietly. Laws that say a body found in a wall is not a parish matter only. These are not small matters. I will not sit in a lit room, with heat in the walls and a recorder that works, and pretend the past was cleaner because it was darker. But I am beginning to think that some older behaviours preserved a kind of caution we have not replaced. Not wisdom, not goodness, caution. the knowledge that a place may have conditions, that speech may transfer more than information, that an unanswered wrong does not become harmless because the paper is signed, that what is sealed is not the same as what is hidden, that some ground has been asked to hold more than the living can politely remember. I am beginning to think that a story of this kind is not finished when it is told. It is finished, if it is ever finished, when someone who has heard it behaves differently afterwards. Hedig behaved differently. I have. I do not know what you will do with it. I only know that you have heard it now. I do not know if the ground was ever made holy. I know that we have walked on it. That is the real. Sleep well.